So let's dive in, and we are not going to cover all these topics, but this comes from Federal Student Aid, who are our partners. As you heard, I've been in financial aid for about 35 years for lots of different institutions, and I work in partnership with the feds on particular issues. This is one of them, but FAFSA is the application that you will complete every year the student is going to be in school, and that FAFSA gets you access to federal financial aid. It is the single application that gets you into the application process for federal financial aid, for some state financial aid programs in the state of Florida, and for many institutional financial aid programs. Now, I just want to say one word while we're here. There are some institutions that require other financial aid forms too. FAFSA is required by every college in the country, but if you're attending a place like University of Miami, or you want to go someplace like University of Southern California, some of those institutions have other forms that they may require as well. So just be aware you may need to take a look at the forms that they require too. We can talk more about those in the question and answer later if you want to. So as we go through, we're going to go through this preview presentation. It will give you some examples of what screenshots look like on the online FAFSA form. Then this new version of the FAFSA form was available by December 1. It is live right now. And in fact, you should be, and I'm glad you're here tonight, you should be going ahead and getting your FAFSA form done for next academic year, for the 2025-26 academic year. And as a reminder, you will need to do a FAFSA each year for each student who's going to be in college. Each FAFSA is separate, and each student needs to have their FAFSA done each year. We're going to follow a pathway that I'm going to recommend, which is that the student begin the application and that the parent gets invited to do their section of the application. So you'll see as we go through, I'll walk you through this, and we'll walk through the process as it goes. So let's start in. The first thing you need to make sure you've done is set up your FSA ID. FSA, again, stands for Federal Student Aid. And to do that, you're going to visit studentaid.gov. That is the website. And here's a live example. This is we are in right now in the real studentaid.gov website. So if you've never logged in before as a student, your student will need to create an account. And I'm going to quickly walk you through that. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but it's really important you do this, and you do this at least 1 to 3 days before you do the rest of the FAFSA. Once you create your FSA ID, it can take 1 to 3 days for the Department of Education to confirm that your FSA ID is valid and ready to go. You don't want to do the FAFSA until you get that email saying it's been confirmed. So the student's going to need an FSA ID. That is their way to acknowledge and sign their application. And each parent who fills out the FAFSA is going to need their own FSA ID. So it's possible, and we'll talk a little more about who has to do the FAFSA a little later, but it's possible that the student will need an FSA ID or username and password, and each parent might need an FSA ID or username and password. How do you create one? Well, you go to studentaid.gov, you'll click on Create an Account, and that opens up a page that looks like this. We click on Get Started, and it's just some basic information. It asks you for name, middle initial, last name, date of birth, social security number. If you don't have an SSN, if you're a parent who doesn't have their own social security number, you can click that, and it will alleviate that need. But if you do have a social security number, you want to make sure you type it, and you want to make sure you type it properly, the right SSN. That social security number is going to be matched against the Social Security Administration database, and it's how we're going to link your information to the IRS, which is really important. Once you click continue, there's a series of other, we're not going to go through this, but there's a series of other pages that ask for your contact information, your email, your cell phone number, etc. And again, you can see here are all the different sections you're going to see. Account information, that's your username and password, your contact information, how you prefer to be communicated with by email or by paper mail, some challenge questions, and then confirming and verifying the information you provided and setting up 2 steps so that you can actually validate with your email or validate with your cell phone. Again, a reminder, you're going to want to do this at least once for the student And if you're a parent and this is the first time you've ever done a FAFSA, either for yourself or for any other student, you want to make sure you get one for you as well. If you already have an FSA ID, you can use it for this year's FAFSA, but you want to make sure again that at least one parent has an FSA ID. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation. That's your first step. Once you do that, what's your next step? Well, the next step is logging in and completing the FAFSA. So let me take you to that. Now, again, you can either click on the link that says apply, or if you go to the FAFSA form link and say complete the FAFSA form, that will take you to this website, and it looks like this. And I just want to highlight a couple of things here. So first of all, you see start a 25-26 FAFSA form. So for seniors in high school who are starting college in the fall, they'll be starting in the 25-26 academic year. This is the form they will want to complete where it says log in to start. If you're a parent, you're going to log in to accept an invitation. We'll get there when we get there, but just to looking at that right now. And if you need to do last year's form, actually the current year's form, 24-25, for a student who's attending school this year, that's where you'll log in to start the 24-25 form. Now, while we're here, I just want to answer a question that comes up often for students who might be starting in summer. If you're a graduating high school student and you're going to start taking classes in a summer program, you'll have to talk to the college. The college or university may want you to do both a 25-26 form for classes that start in fall and a 24-25 form for classes that start in summer. So again, check in with the college. They will tell you if that's required, and they'll tell you that information. So that's important to know as you're figuring out which FAFSA year you're applying for. So again, the screen looks like this. You can see what we looked at. That is the process. So once you log in using your FSA ID and password, and again, you're going to wait until you get a confirmation from the government that they've approved your FSA ID and password. Once you log in, you're going to be taken to this screen. It says, how are you starting the FAFSA? Are you starting the FAFSA as a student or a parent? And again, the recommendation I'm going to make tonight is that you always start as a student because it will link up to your parents much more efficiently. So the student's going to select student. The screens I'm going to show you tonight, they're going to look a lot the same when we go through the parent side. So they're basically the same screens. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the parent side giving you the same information, but I want to point this out to you as we go. So for example, these first four screens are going to be screens that walk you through what is the FAFSA form, how does the FAFSA form work, some information about that. And by the way, there's a question in the Q&A box I'm just going to name. It says, who's in the house? Please write the name of your school in the chat. We want to make sure that we shout you out. So if you're following along, please open up the chat and please feel free to type in the name of the school that you're here representing. So these four videos, you can watch them if you want to. If you don't want to, you don't have to. The first one tells you what the FAFSA is and why it's important. The second one defines something called a contributor. We're going to talk about what a contributor is in a moment. But just FYI, that's what that is. This is about what a contributor is. The third one talks about what to expect when you're doing your FAFSA form. And the fourth video tells you what happens after you submit your FAFSA form. So it walks through all of those pieces. Each of these videos are short. They're probably 1 to 2 to 3 minutes long. If you want to spend some time watching them, you can. But once you're done, you'll click on this button that says Start Your FAFSA Form, and that will take you to the form itself. So the very first page that will come up is a page that clarifies and does highlight for you what you've already put or what the student have in your FSA ID. So you can see in this case, right, this is Jenny Price. It confirms her date of birth, confirms her social security number, confirms her mailing address. If any of this information is wrong, she will need to go back to the FAFSA menu and log in to correct her FSA ID. She can't correct it here. It was done at the time she created that FSA ID. But once she's confirmed that, she's going to click continue. And the very next question that is asked is about student state of legal residence. So I just want to talk about this question because this causes some families some confusion. Students, if you're born in the state of Florida, right, your state is Florida, the date you became a legal resident is the date of your birth. So you'll put month and year of your birth. If you moved to Florida at some point during your lifetime, you want to put the month and year that you moved to Florida and became a legal resident of the state of Florida. So that may be when when your parents came in with you, etc. For parents, because again, we're going to have this question again for parents. For parents, same thing. You want to put the date that you became, month and year, you became a resident of the state of Florida. What's important to know here is that that date needs to be at least a year before you start college. So if you start college in August of 2025, you want to make sure that that date is at least a year before that, August of 2024. The reason for that is in-state tuition is only available to people who've been a legal resident of the state of Florida for at least 1 year. So for parents, you want to make sure that it's at least a year. If both parents didn't move to the state the same month and year, it doesn't matter. Just pick one. You can answer the older of the two. It doesn't really matter. It all winds up the same at the end, but it's important, again, to make sure that you list that date appropriately. Okay, the next page asks for your consent, you, the student. Again, this is very important. You have to, as a student, and you, the parent, will have to provide consent and approval to link up your information with the IRS. If you do not provide consent as a student, or if parents do not provide consent, then we cannot pull your information from the IRS and you will not be eligible for federal financial aid. Even if you didn't file the tax return, you still need to give consent because what's happening is it's going to go match you against the IRS form so you don't have a return and tell us you didn't file a return. So everyone has to provide consent. This is a long description of what that is. So you'll see some information on the next page, all the way down to approve. Once you click approve, you, the student, have provided consent. If you click decline, you're going to get a message that says you're not going to qualify for financial aid. Are you sure you want to do this? So again, you want to make sure to click approve. So I did see a question in the chat that says, to be clear, as a current high school senior graduating in June 25 and starting college in fall 25, the correct form to fill out is the 25-26 FAFSA. That is correct. So if you're a current high school current high school senior, you're graduating in June, you're going to take the summer off and start college in fall of 25. You are going to go back just a second. You are going to do the 25-26 FAFSA form. That is correct. Okay. So moving on, once you provide consent and you click approve, the very next thing that's going to happen is you'll see a screen that looks like this. And what will happen behind the scenes is that your IRS information will be pulled in from the IRS database right to your FAFSA. If you're a parent who's done a FAFSA years ago, or maybe for a student who's a freshman 2 years ago, you'll remember you used to have to go out and link to the IRS and provide permissions, and you had to do all this work, and maybe you had to hand enter. This time it's much, much easier. And assuming that you have matching information, it will automatically pull your information over without you having to worry about it. And what you'll see, which is really helpful, is you'll see this securely importing your information, which tells you that your information's been reported and made it through. Now, in this case, the sample case we're looking at, there was a problem. In yours, there probably won't be. Yours will come through fine. But in the sample they've given us to work through, it says data not received. What happens if that happens? Don't panic. It's just going to ask you to enter the information by hand. But for most of you, you won't have to. And by the way, I do see the next question about legal guardianship. I'll get to there when I get to the dependency status question. So please know that I'll answer that question as we get to that section. Okay, so if you do get this message, that's fine. You'll be asked additional questions that someone who has a match won't be asked. Okay, so let's go through. So once you get through that front section, again, we're still talking about the student. The student is going to be told the next thing we're going to ask about is your personal circumstances. And you'll see as we click forward that the student has 5 sections of their application. This first section on personal circumstances is going to try to determine if we have a dependent or an independent student. What does that mean? A dependent student is one whose parents have to provide information. And if you're independent, then you can skip your parent information. And this goes to the question around guardianship. So it's going to ask you some questions here as a student to identify if we need parent information or we don't. Now, you might think, okay, but I'm 17 or 18. Why is it asking me if I'm married? I'm not going to be married at 17 or 18. Well, maybe you might be. But also keep in mind, so far, all the questions we looked at for FAFSA are the same questions that a 17-year-old going to college will see, also a 32-year-old going back to school, or someone in their 40s who's going into graduate school, or someone looking for a doctoral degree or a med degree. FAFSA is the same form everyone uses. So all these questions are going to be asked of everyone. That's why it's asking you here to select the student's marital status. So in this situation, this student is single. They're going to choose single because they've never been married. They're not separated from a spouse. They're not divorced or widowed. They're single. They're going to click continue. The next page or next form asks about college or career school plans. So it asks, when you start the fall 25-26 school year, what will your grade level be? Will you be a first-year student, a second-year student, another undergraduate, junior or beyond, or a master's or doctorate program student? So again, for students who are entering school, even if you have dual enrollment credit or AP credit, you're going to want to choose first year in college, first year freshman. Let the school tell you if you're something different. Sophomore is really only for those who are coming back for their second year of college post high school graduation. So if you've graduated from high school with your associate's degree, you're still going to choose first year freshman because the college will make a determination as to what grade level to put you in. Again, for almost all of you, you will not be graduating high school with a bachelor's degree. You want to answer no here. It's going to be the very, very rare student who graduates high school and already has their bachelor's degree as well. Reason that's important is if you answer yes, you've turned yourself down for several financial aid programs. So you want to make sure that answer is correct. Okay, next page. So this is the page, and there was a question about legal guardianship. So I want to just address that as we go through. These are the questions that might make someone independent. And let's look at them together. If you can answer yes to any of these questions, you will click a box, you the student. And if you click one of these boxes, you'll be considered an independent student, meaning no parent information will be required. You'll see the first is the student serving an active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces? Is the student a veteran? Does the student have children or other people of their own who live with them and who are going to get more than half of their support from them? Was the student, anytime since the student turned 13, an orphan or without a living biological or adoptive parent? Were they a ward of the court? Were they in foster care? Were they legally emancipated? Or, as you see here, were they in legal guardianship? So again, if they're in legal guardianship as determined by a court, then they would click that box and that would make them independent and no parental information would be required for the FAFSA. If any of these are correct or more than one, you'll click on the box that is correct. In our student's case, none of these apply. So they're going to click on none of these apply, and we're going to move on to the next screen. The next screen asks about homelessness. So this says, is at any time after July 1, 2024, was the student unaccompanied, meaning without parents, living without parents, and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? The reason this is important is because this is another reason a student might be considered independent. So let's say we have a student who is no longer with their parents are alive, but the student doesn't live with them anymore. The student's not in legal guardianship, they're not in foster care, but they're living independently, they're unaccompanied, and they're homeless. So in that situation, the student would click yes and provide some details, and that would make them independent. In our student's case, the answer is no. Now, this is not about a homeless family. If a family is homeless and they're living together homelessly, right, or together on the streets, or together in a car, or together going house to house, on the kindness of neighbors and friends, in that situation, the student is not unaccompanied, so they would have to answer no. This is really meant for students living on their own and at risk of homelessness. Our student answered no. We're going to click continue. Now, there may be other reasons that might prevent a student from getting parental information. And this is the screen that allows you to specify that. So if a student left home because of an abusive environment, or they've been abandoned by their parents, or they're a victim of human trafficking, or the student themselves is incarcerated, or they're otherwise unable to contact or locate their parents, they can click yes, and that will mark them as having unusual circumstances. Most students are going to click no, however. Even if your parents live overseas, but you're still in contact with them, they can still fill out the FAFSA. Even if your parents are not U.S. citizens, your parents are without documentation, you can still fill out the FAFSA. The only reason you're going to say yes is, again, if one of these conditions happen, or there's some other extenuating circumstance that might cause you to be an unusual circumstance. But otherwise, most students are going to click no and click continue. The very last question around dependency status says, are your parents refusing to provide their information on this FAFSA form? And this is an important question to understand as well, because if your parents refuse to provide information on the FAFSA form, then you're limited in the kind of financial aid you will qualify for. All you will qualify for is an unsubsidized loan of a very limited amount. For incoming students, it's about $3,500. So often what I will hear from families when they get to this point is they'll say, well, my parents can't afford college, or my parents tell me they don't want to give their information because they don't want to pay for college. And my response to that is, well, nothing on the FAFSA form requires them to pay anything. All the FAFSA form is doing is determining whether you're eligible for aid or not. So by providing information, we can determine eligibility. We're not then obligated to have the parents pay. That's a choice between the parent and the student as to how much they want to pay. But if the parents don't provide their information, then no financial aid is eligible to an otherwise dependent student. So it's really important, again, in this case, you answer no if you can and provide your parental information. Okay, next screen. So now we're going to talk about who your parents are. And again, I presume you probably know who your parents are, but the FAFSA doesn't think so. So let me open up another web page, and I'm going to type into the Google search FAFSA Parent Wizard. Now you can do this actually via the FAFSA form, or if you want to, before you even start the FAFSA form, you can do this as a separate piece. I'm going to paste this in the chat. And you'll have a copy of the link if you want to do this on your own. But let's say you're in a situation where your parents are divorced or not married. What do you do? So we're going to put some answers in here, and we're going to play this out. Now, on the FAFSA, as I showed you, you won't see your names of your parents because you haven't typed them in yet. But in this situation, I'm going to create them. So my name is Daniel. My wife's name is actually Rebecca. So I'm going to put Rebecca. We are the parents of our student. We are the biological or adoptive parents. And again, if you answer this question, who's considered a legal parent? It's biological or adoptive, regardless of gender. So grandparents would never be a parent. Foster parents and legal guardians would never be a parent. Widowed step parents would never be a parent, etc., etc. Step parents only consider a legal parent if they've adopted the student. Okay, so I've got Daniel and Rebecca. I'm going to click continue. You'll notice there are 4 questions. The very first question asks, are Daniel and Rebecca married to each other? Not separated. If I say yes, and we are, then we know both Daniel and Rebecca will be parents on the FAFSA form. Now, here's where this is important. That means that one of us at least has to contribute information to the form. A contributor, for the purposes of FAFSA, is not someone who pays money. It's someone who contributes information. So when you see the word contributor, it means contributing information, not necessarily money. So if Rebecca and I are both contributors, the next thing we have to figure out is, do we file our taxes jointly? In 2023, which is the year that's going to be used for your FAFSA for this year, we always use a year and a half before. So you're filling this out in 2024, or maybe you won't do it until after New Year's, 2025. We're going to use the 2023 tax information. In 2023, if we file taxes jointly, then only one of us has to be a contributor. So in that situation, because we did file taxes jointly, either Rebecca or I will be a contributor. We don't both have to be. One of us needs to have an FSA ID. We need to be able to log in and complete our section of the form. So that's the scenario we're going to walk through tonight. But let's say we don't file our taxes jointly. Let's say that we file as married filing separately, or one of us files taxes and the other doesn't, or neither of us file taxes. If that's the case, then both of us are contributors and we both need to have FSA ID information. So again, and we'll both need to provide consent and approval, and we both are going to have to sign the form. The way to think about this is, how many tax records are there? If there's only one tax record, then only one person needs to complete it, right? So if I file jointly with my spouse, there's only one tax record of the IRS. They only need permission to pull one tax record. If we file separately, or one of us files or one doesn't, or neither of us file, then they're going to need permission to check both of us. So in this situation, with us being married, we're the parents. Okay, let's go and say no. So what happens if we're not married to each other? So the next question asks, do we live together? It's possible your parents might be unmarried and living together. Maybe they never got married. So in that situation, if your parents are unmarried, or maybe they're divorced, but still living in the same household, right? If that's a situation, you're still both parents on the FAFSA form. So if we live together, even if we're not married, we're still parents on the FAFSA form. If we file taxes jointly, only one has to be a contributor. If we don't file taxes jointly, both of us are contributors. Same as we talked about before. So we've got two possible scenarios so far. We were married together, right? Married to each other, or we're not married and we live together. What if we don't live together? So we're not married. Either we never got married, or we're divorced, or maybe one of us is widowed. What happens then? The third question here says, which parent has provided more financial support for the student over the past 12 months? What that means is, again, who pays more of my support? Who pays for my housing? Who pays for my meals as a student? Who provides money to me over the last 12 months? So it's whenever you're filling out the form, the 12 months before. If that's exactly the same, or if neither of us support the student financially, then you should select the parent with a greater income and assets. But otherwise, it's who provided more support. Now notice, it never says who does the student live with. It never asks who claims the student on the tax return. This is asking about who provides more financial support. So in our situation, let's say we're divorced. Rebecca provides more support, but the student lives with me. I'm still going to choose Rebecca. Even though the student lives with me, Rebecca pays all the bills. She gives me nice child support, and she pays for housing, etc. So Rebecca's the one who has more of the support. So Rebecca will be the parent. Has she remarried? No. So only Rebecca is a parent on the student's FAFSA form. What if the answer to that question is yes? So if that answer is yes, then it's Rebecca and her spouse, whoever that might be. So the student's step parent is also required to provide information. And like before, if they file taxes jointly, only Rebecca is required to be a contributor. If they filed them separately, then they both have to be contributors on the form. So that's a lot of information, I know. And I'm sure there's some questions that come through. So just to answer, Michael asked a question, do we have to provide information for both parents? Again, it will depend, right? So it'll depend on your answers to these questions. Um, and if I'm assuming you're asking, like, if I'm the parent who fills out the FAFSA, will I have to provide information about Rebecca? You will see that as we go through, and I'll walk you through that. But if you have a different question, feel free to ask that. So hopefully this walkthrough helped you. I think the Parent Wizard's really helpful because it helps you see the scenario play out and actually take a look at it as you go. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. So we talked through all of these questions. The very next screen that comes up asks you to invite your parents to the form. So what's really important here, and this is a little bit of a trick, so I'm going to give you this trick. You only want to complete it for one of the parents. See where it says optional here? Optional in this case means don't fill it out because the best order is to do it one at a time. So even if you know you're going to need both to complete it, I would still only do one at a time. So what information is required for parents? Let's look at that. First of all, if you're doing the first parent, in this case, we've got a married family. So it's going to be father, Mark Price. The following information is going to be necessary. The parent's date of birth. Now remember, who's filling out this form? This is the student filling out this form. So the student needs to know their parent's date of birth. Maybe that's not so hard. Maybe students know their parent's date of birth really easily. But what about social security number? Do students know their parents' social security number? This is really important that students answer this question correctly. This is how this is going to link with you as a parent. So if you're a parent, you want to make sure your student, when they do this page of the form, has your valid social security number so that you can link up and get the invitation that's going to be sent to you to complete your section of the form. Student also has to list the address, email address. You want to make sure this is a valid email address that matches, hopefully, the email address you've used for your FSA ID. Not as important, but most important, you've got to match the date of birth and the social security number. Now, if your parent doesn't have a social security number, you can click this box. But really important, if your parent does have one and you just don't know it, don't click that box. This is only meant if truly your parent doesn't have an SSN. Why might your parent not have an SSN? Well, remember, for federal financial aid, the requirement is that the student be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, meaning they're a permanent resident or some other categories that count there. But it's not a requirement that parents have to be U.S. citizens or eligible non-citizens. So if you're a U.S. citizen student, but your parents aren't, that's fine. They may not have an SSN. So if you click this box, a different series of questions will open up that ask if they have an ITIN number, an individual taxpayer ID number. If they don't, it'll ask for their mailing address. If it does ask you for mailing address, you want to make sure the mailing address matches exactly what your parent typed in on their FSA ID. So what I mean by exactly is really exactly. If you typed 92 ND for 92nd, you want to make sure that your parents typed 92 ND. If you typed in ST period for street and they typed in the word street, that will not match. So it's really important that the mailing address be exactly the same if you're going to do that. Again, remember, only people who don't have an SSN have to type in that mailing address. So in this case, the parent's been invited. They're a US citizen, they have a social number, so it's really easy. You're going to click on Send Invite, and once you click on Send Invite, you'll be able to move to the next section. Now, immediately, parents, you will get an invite to the email address. You can log in and start your section, or you can wait until the student finishes theirs. We're going to go through and finish the student section first, but just know the invite will be waiting for you. The next page that comes up is student demographics. This is a fairly quick section, and frankly, most of the questions you need to ask you've now asked. The rest of this moves very quickly, and you'll see now that we're in the second section of 5. So the first one asks about gender. This is an optional question. It's not required, but it's used for demographic research purposes only and won't affect your financial aid. The next question asks about Race and ethnicity, same. This is research only, will not impact your financial aid. In fact, we at the school don't even see the answer to this question, so we never get it. The next page is important. It asks about citizenship status for the student. Again, keep in mind the student has to be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen to qualify for federal financial aid. And usually at this point, I get a question about what is the definition of eligible non-citizen for FAFSA. So what I will point you to is on studentaid.gov. There's a great page, and I will paste it in the chat for you, that defines what is an eligible non-citizen for students. So if you are an eligible non-citizen, these are all the different categories, and it tells you what happens if you're an undocumented student, etc. So if you have questions about that, I'd recommend you take a look there. But otherwise, our student is a U.S. citizen. We're going to click and continue. Next question asks about your parents, you the student, your parents' college attainment status. Did your parents go to college? Did they attend but not graduate? Or did they graduate college? Or do you not know? And this is really not used for financial aid, but it's used again for tracking purposes. There are some financial aid programs that are based on first generation, but they're usually at individual schools, not federal programs. So it's really just for tracking purposes. The next question asks, was your parent killed in the line of duty, either while serving as a member of the U.S. Armed Forces after 9/11 or performing official duties as a public safety officer? If so, you would answer yes, and you need to provide documentation to the college. There are some aid programs that are set up to help students whose parents were killed in the line of duty, specifically around the Pell Grant. But again, most of you are going to answer no to that question. The next question asks, when you start college, what will be your high school completion status? Will you have a high school diploma? Will you have finished with your GED, homeschooled, or hopefully not none of the above? If none of the above, you won't be eligible for aid. So you need to answer one of these three. Most of you are going to have your high school diploma at the time you start 25-26 school year. If you click that, then you're going to have to search for which high school is it. And this search box is actually really easy to use. So it asks you to type in the state, the city, and then they will recommend a list of schools based on state and city, or you can just type in your high school name and find it. Once you find it, you want to select it and confirm and click continue, and that will move you to the next page where you can confirm that you've selected the right high school. That's it for demographics. We're now going to move to the finances section. Again, this will move pretty quickly. Now, remember I said before that in this particular case, we had a situation where it failed the match with the IRS, if you remember. Because of that, this student's going to be asked questions that most of you will never see. If you match with the IRS, you will not see this question because they will know that you filed or didn't file a 1040. You will never see the question about filing status. This will only show if you don't match with the IRS. You'll never see questions about your income from work, your tax-exempt interest, or your IRA distributions. Probably most students don't have IRA distributions. Those are retirement account distributions. On any of these questions, by the way, if you click on the question box, it will give you more information if you need to know where to find this information on the tax form, for example. Again, going on, most of you won't have many of these questions either. The only question you're going to get is really this couple, and I'll point them out to you. The first question is amounts of college grants, scholarships, or AmeriCorps benefits reported as income to the IRS. So let's talk about this for a second. First of all, most of you aren't going to have this. You're going to have an answer of 0. You can see our student answered 0. This is only going to be the case if you paid taxes on a scholarship. So let's say you got scholarships, and because you got so much in scholarships, some portion of your college grants or scholarships were taxable. If that's the case, the portion that was taxable in the income tax year we're looking at would be listed here by you. That question's going to be asked of everyone. For most of you, it's going to be 0. It's going to be asked of parents as well. For most parents, it's going to be 0. They're asking because they don't want to double penalize you. They don't want you to have been given that scholarship and then also have it count as income. But for most of you, that's going to be 0. The other one that will show up that for most of you will be 0, and again, this is for parents as well as students, is this question about foreign earned income exclusion. So this is only answered if you on your tax return have reported foreign income, foreign earned income that you've excluded. Why would that happen? Well, let's say I'm a US citizen and I'm living abroad in England. And in England, I earn income from my employer in England, and I have to report that on my 1040. But the answer is I pay taxes in England. So the US government says you don't have to pay taxes twice for that. You've already paid taxes in England, so you don't have to pay for it again in the US, and you get to exclude it from your taxable income for US purposes. But here you have to add it back because it is truly income. It's real income, and we need to make sure it's added back. That's why it's asking. Most of you aren't earning income abroad, so most of you will not have to report anything there. If you do, you'll know because it will be on your tax return, but it's an unusual circumstance. All of you, dependent students and then later parents, are going to be asked questions about your assets. So let's look at these questions and let's identify what assets we're talking about. So first of all, the most common asset that families have that is not included is either retirement assets or your home. So neither of those are reported on the FAFSA. We don't ask questions about your retirement assets specifically. We don't ask questions about your home. But what you are going to have to answer is, do you have cash, savings, and checking accounts? And in this case, the student reports $800. That's going to be a sort of standing amount the student has in their account. You'll also see a question, next question that asks about whether or not the student has any investments, right? And that would include things like stocks or bonds that are not retirement accounts, or maybe a second property or other investments that might be required, right? In that situation, you would report investments, but not the home and not any retirement accounts. If you, the student, remember we're in the student section still right now, if you, the student, own a business, you would put the value of your business here after any debt that might be owed. Again, most students aren't going to own a business. Most families aren't going to own a business. So when it comes to the parents section, you'll see these questions again, but probably most of you don't have to answer them. If it's 0, then make sure you put in the answer of 0. Okay, so moving on, that's it for the finances section. So we're really coming to the end of the student section, and we'll go look at the parents section next. The next section in the student section is what colleges is the student looking at applying to? And much like the high school section, there's a search bar where you can search and list the up to 20 colleges the student might be applying to for financial aid. Now, here's my advice, and this is really important. You don't want to wait until you've been admitted to a college to apply for financial aid. You don't even have to wait until you've applied for admission to apply for financial aid. If the student has a list of colleges they want to apply to, go ahead and list all of them on the FAFSA. There's no harm in doing that. You can list up to 20 high schools, sorry, you can list up to 20 colleges on the FAFSA at once. I'll talk about what happens if you have more than 20 schools in a second, but you can list up to 20 schools on the FAFSA at once and get all of the schools your information. You can search by school name or you can search by school code. Every school in the country has a 6-digit school code that is usually on their website. So if it's easier for you to look them up by school code, you can look the college up by school code, or you can search by state and then by name, and you can find the college you want. So in this situation, you'll get a list of colleges. The student has selected 2 of them to add, and they're moving on. So again, you can list up to 20 schools on the FAFSA. What happens if you're listing more than 20? Well, again, in this case, the student's continuing and moving on. If you're applying to more than 20 schools, you want to list the first 20 on this FAFSA, and I would do it by date order. So go to the websites of the schools, find out when they suggest you have your FAFSA turned in by, and list the first 20 with the earliest deadline first. For example, at University of Miami, our recommended priority date for FAFSA is January 6th. We want you to have done your FAFSA by January 6th. So if we're one of your 20 or we're one of your 25, we probably would be on your first FAFSA list of colleges. Once you submit the FAFSA, and this is a sneak peek ahead of what's coming, in about a week to 10 days, you'll get a reply back saying your FAFSA has been processed. Feel free to log in and make any corrections you want to. So at that point, if you have more than 20 colleges you're applying to, you can log back into FAFSA and replace on your school list any additional colleges you need to, up to another 20 schools. And I'll show you how that works if you stay on. We'll look at that as a correction. So that is how you do it. You don't do a second FAFSA. You only do one FAFSA, list the first 20 schools, wait a week, and then list any more schools if you need to. Okay, so once you've done your colleges, you're basically done. You have to make sure you sign, you, the student, sign the form. This is really critical. You cannot close the application without signing it, or else it will be rejected. So you get to this page that says continue to sign your form. You'll see sections. You can expand them or contract them and see all the information you provided. And at the very, very bottom, you'll see that there are parent sections that have not yet been done. If you click on continue, that'll take you to your signature page. You have to go all the way down to the bottom of the form, click where it says, I agree to the terms outlined above. It'll have your name, and click sign. And that is your section, students, of the form. So that completes your section of the form. You'll see a screen that looks something like this that will tell you, congratulations, you've done your section. We're waiting for your parent or contributor to do their section. If you were determined to be an independent student because you're an orphan or in foster care or ward of the court, you're really done, or in legal guardianship. There's no parent information required, and yours will say, congratulations, you're done. But if you're not, if you're a dependent student, your parents will next have to do their section of the form. So, by the way, it will tell you more about what to do and how to get information about what's next in your process. Parents. I'm going to turn to parents now. And as I said, this will go much faster. You might be looking at the clock thinking it's 6:51. How's he going to do this in 9 minutes? Just watch, because most of this is going to be exactly the same as you've had before. So parents, you're going to get an invitation. Again, remember, one of you will, because you've only listed one parent. That parent needs to click on Get Started on the email invitation, or they can log in to studentaid.gov themselves. And once they log in, they'll be taken to their invitation. Remember that they have to have their own FSA ID, and it needs to match that Social Security number that was provided before, or if the parent doesn't have a social number, has to match the name and address. They're going to click Accept Invitation, and it's going to confirm that you really want to share your information with the student. The answer is yes. And you're going to see, again, many of the same slides we just went through. So the first 4 slides are those 4 videos we talked about before. The next slide is your identity information. We looked at that. The next slide is consent. We looked at that before. Again, remember, parents, you have to provide consent for your student to receive federal financial aid. You'll then be told information is being imported. And again, in this example, it failed. But in your situation, it probably won't, or most likely will not. And now we move to parent demographics. So the question of parents, and notice, by the way, that there are only 3 sections on the parent application, not 5. The first question is, what's you, the parent's marital status? Single, unmarried, married, remarried, separated, divorced, or widowed? And so you'll answer the question that's the right answer here. Again, we talked about legal residence. For parents, it's going to be the date the first of you either came to Florida or were born in Florida. And then now we're in parent finances. So that was section 1. Now we're in section 2. Remember, like before, most questions I'm going to show you will not have to be answered because we'll have your tax information. This one will, however. This asks about federal benefits. Do you receive any federal benefits? And it gives you a list of the different kinds of benefits. Free or reduced lunch, Medicaid, CHIP, SNAP, SSI, TANF, WIC. If you received or will receive any of these benefits in 23 or 24, you should click on the box because there's special conditions that will apply to you in determining your contribution for college. Otherwise, click none of the above. The next page will ask questions, and again, these questions are really, they're asked of any parent. Will you file the 2023 IRS tax form, or did you? And will you file it with your current spouse? Let's talk about that for a second. So let's say you've been divorced since 2023, or God forbid, a parent has died. You would answer no, and then you'd be prompted to put in your information manually. But if you matched and the information matches and you say yes, then all the information will just carry over. The next page asks about family size. This is an opportunity for you to correct family size if you've had new children or you've gotten married since your 2023 taxes. Otherwise, we're going to use the exemptions that are on your 2023 tax return. If you and your spouse file separately from each other or don't file taxes, you do want to put in a family size because you'll need that information in the system. The government can't figure it out if we don't have records to be able to compare it to. But in most situations, if you file joint tax returns or you're the only parent filing, you don't have to provide this information. It also asks how many of the people in your family are in college or will be in college during the coming year. This is just for information only. It doesn't get used in your financial aid analysis. Now, again, most of these questions are questions being asked because there was a failure in matching to the tax record. And you can see again a link that says, where do I find this information on the tax form? But this is all the tax questions we talked about before. And we talked about these questions, the foreign and income exclusion question and the college grants and scholarship questions when we looked at the student side. Again, if they don't apply, and for most of you, they won't, you're going to want to answer 0. And these questions will be asked of everyone, even if it matches to the IRS. Assets. So the one new question for assets that's a little different than the student is it asks about annual child support received. So this is asking if you, the parent, received child support in the last year, and the last year being the last complete calendar year as of the day you filed the form. So if you filed the form today, the last complete calendar year would be 2023, and you'd report how much child support you actually received in 2023. If you file the form on January 1st, the last complete calendar year would be 2024. And in that situation, you want to report the annual child support you received in 2024 because it's asking for the last complete calendar year as of the day you file the form. We've talked about the asset questions before. Again, home is not listed, retirement is not listed, and you can see that there. The last question here asks for you to provide information about the other spouse. And this is where you're going to list, or if you have a spouse, this is where you're going to list the other parent. And if there's a need to invite them to be a contributor, that invitation will happen here. But in this case, they file jointly. It's just asking for information about them. Once they continue, there's no need to go further. It's not going to need to send them an invitation for them to complete the form. But there is an option here, a requirement actually, to list the other spouse if there is a second spouse in the family that we're looking at. So like before, we get the whole continue to sign your form. Parents have to go through, look at the bottom, click sign and submit. Once they do, they have completed the FAFSA and you will get a note that says, congratulations, the FAFSA form is complete. Both the student actually will get a confirmation that their FAFSA has been submitted. And as we said, it does take 1 to 3 days for that FAFSA form to go through and complete and for you to get back a notice that the FAFSA is complete. Now, I promised that I would go through the parents section and be done by 7. I did. I told you it was very fast. I do want to look just quickly at what happens if the student wants to add a school to the FAFSA form. So like I said before, let's say you're applying to more than 20 schools, or you forgot to list a school on the FAFSA and you want to go back and add another one. What happens then? Well, To access an existing FAFSA form, you have to log in as a student again to your FSA ID. Once you do, you'll be able to see on what's called your account dashboard that you have a FAFSA form already filed under My Activities page. And if you see that, you can click on Details, and that will take you to the next section. So if you click on My Activity, click on the FAFSA form itself, that will take you to here. You can see where you are in the process. Under the menu, you'll see something that says either add, remove schools, or make corrections. Let's say you made an error and you need to go back and make a correction. You can always log in and either add, remove schools, or make a correction. Once you start the correction, right, in this case, you can see it, by the way, if you go on the page, if you keep on scanning down this page, you can see the colleges that this was reported to. But let's say you choose add or remove schools. It'll take you to this page that says only change the fields that are incorrect, and we will send your correction to the new schools. It'll take you right to the schools page that you were there before. You can, if you click continue, you can delete schools, you can add schools, and you can add or remove them as you need to. And you can see the additional list here. This student is adding some more schools. And once they've done that, they click continue. Again, they have to, they have to sign the form. So like before, they have to go through, confirm that they sign it and agree and submit it. And as a result, now they have the form sent to their additional school or schools as needed. So with that, that really covers what I wanted to cover for the FAFSA form in its entirety. As I said before, we are recording the event tonight. I know that there have been many questions that have been submitted, and we've been able to answer them in the Q&A. But I would love to open this up for you now to ask any questions you would like. Feel free to type them in the chat or in the Q&A. And I'm going to ask my colleagues who are answering questions if there are any questions that were asked that I missed that you would like me to address at this point. Looks like maybe no.
Mr. Daniel, we have
Yes.
a number of students typically will say to us, I forgot my login information. How do I get in? Can you share that?
Of course, I'd be happy to. Let's look at that together. And given the holiday season, you can see that I am ready for the holidays in my in what I've got listed. So let me pull up the website and let's look at it together. So let's go back for a second. So let's say that you've forgotten your FSA ID. You don't remember what it is. So when you come back here, you click on login. One of the options here is either I've forgotten my username or I've forgotten my password. If you've forgotten your password, you can type in either your phone number, if you've set it up that way, your email address, or your FSA ID username. Well, my email address at Gmail, my date of birth, I'm going to type it in. I'm going to click continue. It will ask me, and I'll do this really quickly. Let me actually stop sharing so you don't see my date of birth because, it's not public information. But wish me a happy birthday. No, not really. So once I'm there, right, I have some choices. I can either text a code to my phone, I can email the code to me, or I can answer my challenge questions, or I can, if I've used an authenticator app, I can use my authenticator app. When you go through and create your FSA ID, you're going to set up your mobile phone and your email to match. That's why it's really important you do that. So if you forget your password, you can always come back to it. So in this situation, I can text it to my mobile phone and I'll get the message that way. If I go back, let's say I don't even remember, it's not my password, I've forgotten my username. I don't even remember a username. So if that's the situation, first of all, you don't need to have your username to log in. You can use your email address or your mobile phone number instead of your username. But let's say I want to recover my username. Same situation. I can text something to my phone, I can email myself, I can answer my challenge questions, or I can use a secure code from my authenticator app as a way to get in there. Is that helpful, Ms. Green? Hopefully that is.
Yes, that is.
Great.
And we also have a question in the chat, in the Q&A about investments.
Sure. Let me see if I can take a look at it. Okay, here we go. Yes. Okay. So I see this. Um, for IRA deductions and payments to self-employed, so let's talk about this. So what they're asking here, and this is again only if you are, um, no. So yeah. So let me pull up the copy of the 1040, and we can look at this together. And Michael, I appreciate the question. It is a pretty detailed one. So I want to show you the actual form. So let's look at the IRS form and we can look at this together. Hold on. I'm going to share my screen again and let's take a look. So the question you're referencing is asking about payments that you've made or received from tax exempt or from retirement programs. It's asking you about line number 16 and 20, and this is on, let's see if I see where you're seeing that. Let's go back for a second. I want to go back to the IRS information question. Give me a second. I know the question you're referring to, but I want to make sure we refer to the exact correct piece. Here we go. So, okay. So the specific question you were referring to, I believe, is untaxed portion of pensions, untaxed portions of IRA distributions. So in that situation, it is actually lines 4A and 5A that it's talking about here is the untaxed portion. So, or the difference, depending upon how you report it, the difference between the taxable and the untaxable or total amount. So it's only being reported for the non-taxable portion. The pieces that are on your W-2 no longer need to be reported. It's only the sections that come out here as the non-taxable portion of those payment types. I hope that answers your question. If you have more details, feel free to type them back in. Helena asks, where can she find a recording of this meeting? We will send that out. It will be actually on the YouTube page. Okay, let's see.
And here's another one. As a
Go ahead.
dependent,
I
what
saw
should I
that one.
do if my legal parent isn't my contributor or the person who claims my benefits on tax forms, but it is instead filed by a let's see,
Separate guardian
separate
who hasn't
guardian
adopted
who
you.
has not adopted me?
Yep. If you have not been adopted and you still have a legal parent, your legal parent has to file the form. Now, it may be a situation in that situation that your relationship is broken down with your legal parent. I don't know. We haven't gotten all the details. And in that situation, maybe you need to answer the question that says, I've got an unusual circumstance or situation. But again, the standard answer would be if you're living with someone else, like a grandparent, or you're living with an aunt or uncle, but you still have a legal parent who is living, and you have not been declared in legal guardianship or foster care, you have to have that legal parent do your FAFSA unless you do an appeal. And that may be the situation you're in is a need to do an appeal. But again, you wouldn't know that. You can answer on the FAFSA the question that says, and I'll go back to this question that talks about unusual circumstances. So, one more time, let me show you that page and let me share my screen so you can see it. Here's the question. So it says, do unusual circumstances prevent the student from contacting their parents, or would contacting their parents pose a risk to the student? If that is true, then you would check yes, and we won't need your parental information. But again, it's going to depend on your particular circumstance. If you're still in touch with that parent and you still have a good relationship, you're just not living with them, then they're still going to be the one who fills out the FAFSA for the purposes of the FAFSA itself. I hope that it helps to answer your question. Thank you, Ms. Cooper. Ms. Cooper posted in the Q&A the YouTube page for all previous recordings as well as tonight's recording. And I will just show you again, this will be a little bit of meta. The College and Career Center look at that guy, I know him. College and Career Center will have a piece here. It's at the College Career Corner 488. Sorry, I said center. It's College Career Corner CCC. The College Career Corner 488. You can get it at youtube.com/at the College Career Corner 488. I would assume that hopefully by tomorrow or the next day, you would see my presentation up here under videos as well if you want to go back and watch it. If you're watching this on YouTube, then ignore this because you've already found it. So there we go. That was a joke, but no one's laughing, or at least I can't hear you laughing. Other questions or other comments you'd like to make? Again, I don't need to keep you on here longer than you need to be, but I want to make sure you take advantage, families and students, of the fact that I'm here and see if there's any other questions that I can answer for you.
I have one last question that comes up a lot. Many times students will say, I don't need to fill out the FAFSA because my parents are gonna be the ones paying for everything. And do they actually need to have it though?
Well, that's a great question. So let me talk about that for a minute. I did want to talk a little bit about the other application that we use for financial aid. Keep in mind the FAFSA. So many families make the mistake and think, well, if I don't qualify for Pell Grant, right? So maybe I'm not low enough income to qualify for financial aid. Why should I apply? So keep in mind the FAFSA is used for all different kinds of financial aid, not just the federal Pell Grant and not just for the most needy families. So you should complete a FAFSA if you think you're going to need help with any of the college expenses. At the University of Miami, and I'm not doing this because I want to plug this, I just want to show you, if you're not applying to that's not a problem, but I just want to show you an example of one of the web pages you might see at one of the colleges, right? For us, applying for aid incorporates not just the FAFSA, but also another form called the CSS profile. And I just want to highlight that form for you and mention that as well. If you're a student who's looking at a number of private, more expensive colleges like ours, I mean, to be honest, our college is much more expensive than UCF or USF, but we also have a lot more financial aid that we can offer. So families who come to us can qualify for as much financial aid as they need, and sometimes it can be the same cost or less to attend our institution. But if you're applying to an institution that needs additional forms, one you might see is one called the CSS profile form. And if you're unclear, here's the link for that. And again, I will paste that in the chat as well. The CSS profile form, if you need to know which schools require it, if you click on the list of participating schools, you can look by state. You also want to look at only those that are required for incoming domestic students, meaning U.S. students, citizens, or eligible non-citizens. You'll see in the state of Florida, there's a grand total of one university that requires it for incoming students, and we're the one. But let's say you're a Florida resident and you're thinking of applying to school in Massachusetts. There are a lot of schools in Massachusetts that require the CSS profile form. Harvard being one of them, MIT being another, Wellesley, Williams, Emerson, College of the Holy Cross, Brandeis, Boston University, Boston College. So if you're applying to any of those schools, you want to make sure you do the CSS profile as well. I know this is a long answer to your question, Ms. Green, but it's important to understand that schools may provide financial aid of their own to families who have incomes of much higher than would qualify for Pell Grant. In fact, the average income of those who receive aid at the University of Miami is $198,000 a year. That is average income. So we have families earning much more than that, and we have families who are earning less than that who qualify for financial aid at our institution because the price tag is much higher. So again, I would encourage families to fill out the FAFSA and the CSS profile if they need to, or whatever other form is required, if they think they're going to need any assistance in paying for college. This is your avenue for figuring out what kind of assistance you might need. Okay, let's
Thank
see.
you.
No problem.
There are two more.
Sure, go ahead.
Michael wants to know, my question is under tax and credits on the 1040 form. Am I only adding line 16 to 20 or
Thank
16
you.
and 20?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, that's much more helpful. I appreciate the answer. So again, in most situations, the tax information is automatically going to come over, so you won't need to provide it. If you do need to provide the tax information, let's pull that back up again. This is a question that's actually been adjusted over time. It's asking for income tax paid, and I'll share my screen and then let's look at the 1040 together and I'll show you the line item that you will use. So on the screen it says income tax paid and it doesn't tell you much more than that. But if I pull up, to your point, if I pull up the 1040 and let's take a look at that. Just give me 1 second. Let's pull up the 2023 1040 again. The particular line item you want to use, if I can get to page 2, well, that's always, there we go, finally, thank you. Give it a, there we go. The line item you're actually going to want to use is line 24, total tax. So here you'll see line 24, total tax. That is the line item that is used for the purposes of taxes paid as reported on the FAFSA. It is not line 16. It's not line 20. It's actually line number 24. Those instructions may be a little out of date if you're using the paper form, but that is the correct information. Brett said, I'm sorry, I missed the part about veterans benefits for the family. Can you please review it? Veterans benefits are typically non-taxable benefits. So if they're non-taxable benefits, they do not have to be reported as income. They won't be reported on the form itself. An anonymous user asked, what happens after the form submitted in process? When do you find out if you get any aid? Great question. So that will depend on the individual college and university and their process and their timeline. Typically, if you apply by the recommended deadline or prospective deadline, you should be hearing about your financial aid at the time you also hear about your admissions to the institution. That should come at the same time. But again, you want to make sure that you provide whatever information is requested by the college or university. Some may ask for your taxes, some may ask for just the FAFSA, some may ask for the CSS profile. So, assuming you've provided all the information, it should come around the time or shortly after when the admissions information is sent to you. So, again, I would look for that around that time frame. So I think that answers all the questions we've received so far tonight. Are there any last closing comments that Ms. Green you'd like to make,
Yes, sure, absolutely. Our supervisor, Dr. Cooper, is with us. She might want to also say something, but on behalf of her team, we want to thank you for this amazing presentation, very thorough, very paced, so that if we got lost, we could catch up. Thank you so much for doing this, Daniel. And for all who joined us, we are so happy that we were able to help you get that milestone of getting FAFSA done. And remember that the College and Career Readiness team is always available to help you, and so are the Brace advisors in your school. And so we wish you happy holidays, happy Kwanzaa, happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, and we'll see you next year. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much. Ms. Cooper, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Nope, Miss Yvonne wrapped that up so nicely. Happy holidays, everyone. Again, the YouTube page will have tonight's recording, just in case you joined us late. So the full recording will be on the YouTube channel that was posted in the chat. So please click there so you have that saved in your browser.
Thank you all very much. Have a great evening. It was a pleasure to be with you tonight. Hope you have a great holiday season and have a great FAFSA season.
Yes.
And we will see you again soon. Thank you.
Yes,
Take
and
care.
someone said thank you for an excellent presentation.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank
Okay.
you very much. Take good care.
Thank you. Good
Bye-bye,
night,
everyone.
everyone.